Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, here today with another Omnibus review, and today I'll be taking a look at the Spider-Gwen Omnibus. Now this is actually my most recent read at the time of making this, so it's pretty fresh in my mind, and hopefully that means I'll be able to give a decent amount of insight into what it is and what it's like. For anybody who's unsure as to whether or not they want to pick this up while it's still around, or just read the series in general. So I will take a look through, give an overview, flick through the book, and just share some of my thoughts as I go. I do want to give a spoiler warning here before I go any further and before I forget to do so, because I will definitely talk about quite a few plot points as I go through here, because as I say, I do want to review it in a decent amount of detail, and it'd be pretty difficult to do that without discussing some of the key plot points. So fair warning, if you haven't read the series yet and want to keep it that way, you might want to check this video out later. But yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look. So first of all, we've got the dust jacket here, and this cover was the standard variant. It's the cover of Edge of Spider-Verse issue 2, Spider-Gwen's first appearance, which was part of the build-up surrounding the SpiderVerse event from 2015, which is what she initially featured in, and also that will be getting an omnibus actually later on this year, which will be something I'll be looking to pick up. But Spider-Gwen really spun out of that series as she was one of the most popular new spider variants, new spider people who were introduced in that story, and I think she was well worth giving that series too. She's an interesting character, and we see a good amount of development for her here. Just showing off the spine here, so what you can hopefully see is that it's a pretty unique, funky looking spine with this purple colouring going along the spine and also the back of the book. Very interesting, very much stands out compared to other Marvel Omnibus. I think no matter which books you put it next to in your Marvel section, this is probably going to stand out as being pretty unique. The back of the book is also pretty cool, as I say, same colouring, and you get some of the covers that feature throughout this run. Very interesting. It's a nice design. And then at the bottom you get your material collected, a summary of what that is. But basically it's everything from I think 2015 to 2018, the first two series, Spider-Gwen 2015A 1 to 5. And Spider-Gwen 2015B 1 to 34, named A and B because both series started in 2015. So yeah, I mean, it is a little bit confusing, but that's comics. They tend to be quite confusing with all the constant series relaunches and going back to new number ones all the time. Doesn't really help for readers, especially new readers trying to get into it, figuring out where to start, what to read, what carries on into what, etc. But the book itself anyway, got this pretty cool design on it. Gwen sort of running away from her shadow as Spider-Gwen during one of the many moments in which she has a bit of a personal crisis as to whether or not she should continue being Spider-Woman, because that is officially how she's known, by the way. She isn't referred to as Spider-Gwen by everybody in the story. That's just the name of the series, I think, for reader convenience as much as anything else. Not to confuse her with the other Spider-Women, because, there's a few these days. Yeah, so here we go with Edge of Spider-Verse number 2. What the Edge of Spider-Verse series was part of the build-up to Spider-Verse. Each issue of Edge of showcased a short story that served as a kind of a quick origin for the different spider people who were going to be featuring in that event, Spider-Gwen being just one of them. But, as I say, also the one that seemed to capture the interest of most people, all leading to her getting her own series. So the gist of what's going on with Gwen in this universe is Earth 65, the main Marvel continuity being Earth 616. Yes, it does get hard to keep track of all these different Earths with these numberings. I find it's easier just to kind of go with it. As long as you remember 616 is the main one, I think you'll be good. But yeah, so in this universe it was Gwen Stacy, not Peter Parker, who was bitten by the radioactive spider. She gained the spider powers, became Spider-Woman. And Peter Parker, interestingly, actually became the Lizard. So he was bullied even more seriously than the main 616 Peter Parker, to the point of being just thoroughly depressed in life. He experimented on himself, became the Lizard, had a fight with Spider-Woman, and Gwen accidentally ended up sort of killing him. He died in the fight, and the guilt that she carries from that, from having been good friends with Peter Parker as well, is shown to affect her deeply throughout the rest of the series, really. And with this being an alternate Earth, and with the whole multiverse thing being what it is, one of the key sort of recurring things that we see through here is just sort of things being the same but different, you know. So you've got a lot of familiar characters. So we see Gwen's dad, Captain George Stacy. We see villains like the Vulture, Rhino, Kingpin, but they're all different to, you know, the version that we know as being the main version. So right away in this first issue of the 2015 A series, she ends up in a confrontation with the Vulture. This guy here is kind of a funny sort of comic relief recurring character known as the Bodega Bandit. He basically robs snacks from cafes and bodegas around New York, and Gwen is constantly stopping him. He's kind of pathetic, that's the whole thing. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff. So Gwen's part of a band called the Mary Janes, which is kind of fronted by Mary Jane, or MJ as she's just called throughout here. So, you know, she's a drummer. Pretty interesting concept, really. And her costume, I think, you know, what I've got to mention straight away, and what I think is probably the coolest thing about the character, and what I imagine is what drew a lot of people's immediate interest to the character, is just how genuinely cool this costume is. This kind of white and black, wearing the hoodie, you know, hood over the mask, the light blue kind of ballerina shoes. It's a really cool design. Like, you know, not often that a new character gets introduced with such a sort of immediately iconic costume. And, well, you may disagree that it's iconic, but I think it's already one that's cemented its place in really a short amount of time as a really great superhero costume. But this is a good bit. So she's like smacked her head and she starts hallucinating that Spider-Ham, the pig Spider-Man, who also came out of Spider-Verse, is following around and talking to her. This is really quite a quirky series, you know, I've got to say. So it's written by Jason Latour. He writes basically everything in here. Artwork is by Robbie Rodriguez, and colorist is Rico Renzi. And really sort of need to talk about the artwork. It's this very, you know, as I'm sure you've seen, you know, already early on, it's this very sort of cartoony modern style, almost looks a little bit like a manga style at points. When this series was first coming out, I tried to read it a few years ago, and I just couldn't get into it. The art style, more than anything, was just putting me off. It just wasn't really my thing. So I ended up leaving this series for quite a long time, and just decided to get back into it recently. And I found that I was actually okay with it this time around. So I picked up the Omnibus, and managed to read through the whole thing and enjoy it. The art didn't actually put me off. In fact, I ended up kind of liking it in the end. I can't really tell you exactly why I changed my mind, other than maybe in the years since I first tried to read it, I've read so many different comics, seen so many different art styles since then, that maybe I've just become a bit more open-minded to it. I don't know really, or maybe I just wasn't in the right mood for it or something the first time around. Who knows? But this time around I thought it looked really cool, and I kind of viewed it through the lens of it's an alternate Earth, so it makes sense for things to look different to how we're used to, and to be coloured in this very bright, vivid way that I think really suits the tone of the stories. This time around I kind of accepted it that way, and it worked when I thought about it in that way. So we get, Frank Castle here shows up as a version of the Punisher, but basically he's just like an obsessive rogue cop who is determined to hunt down Spider-Woman because he sees her as a criminal no matter what. You know, he's pushing the boundaries of the law, pretty much breaking the law really at times in his sort of vendetta against her. So it's just an interesting story. I found it to be quite fun to get to know this version of Gwen. She is a very kind of troubled character. She pretty insecure, so she's racked with guilt over what happened to the Peter Parker of her universe. And she's got the classic kind of Spider-Man style thing of nobody really knows who she is, so she's constantly stressing over trying to keep her secret identity intact. You know, her friends in the band, the Mary Janes, they don't know who she is. Initially her dad doesn't know who she is, but she does reveal it to him pretty quickly. And as the series goes on, more and more people do end up discovering who she is, and that creates a whole new set of problems for her as that starts to go on. Not least of which because the Matt Murdock of this universe is a villain. He's a total kind of psychopath, really. He's a part of the Hand And yeah, basically in this universe, he kind of started out being good, but went bad. You know, something happened in his life that was different to the main 616 as Matt Murdock, so he went down a different path, became a villain, and actually ends up becoming the Kingpin in here as well. So he is really the main recurring villain through the majority of the stuff in here. But yeah, so we see, as I say, you know, alternate versions of other characters. Captain America is Samantha Wilson in this universe. Oh yeah, so the other thing is that Gwen's got this interdimensional watch, which she doesn't get it in this series, so I have to think she got it in the SpiderVerse event at some point. It's been years since I read that, so I really don't remember. But she's just kind of got it as the start of this series. So she can jump between Earth 65 and Earth 616 pretty much at will for most of the story, which means she can interact with Jessica Drew, Spider-Woman, Cindy Moon, Silk, and you know, anybody else in the main universe. Miles Morales, there's a crossover with him a bit later on, which is actually really fun. Get a version of the Green Goblin here. Green Goblin is Harry Osborn, and he blames Gwen for Peter's death. He was also Peter's friend. Yeah, there's a lot of drama. You know, things never really ease up for this version of Gwen, which is kind of a classic sort of spider trope, really. If you're going to do a Spider-Man kind of character, a version of Spider-Man, obviously things have never really been easy for Spidey. So quite cool to see, you know, all these different Earths, these different spider people struggle with a lot of the same sort of stuff. I really like the whole Spider-Verse thing, you know, this whole different spider people. It really worked for me. I mean, I am a huge Spider-Man fan, so I guess it would. But I can understand why this wouldn't be for everybody. And I can understand why, you know, this art style wouldn't be for everybody as well. As I say, it wasn't for me at first, so I get why you would initially be potentially put off by it. But I do think it's worth giving it a chance, because, you know, I did end up having a lot of fun. Oh yeah, so there's a crossover here with Laura Kinney, who was Wolverine at this point, this being part of the all-new Wolverine era, when Logan was kind of thought to be dead. So Laura Kinney was in his costume, taking his place for a while in that series. But that's more of like just like a little fun comedy team-up, really, than an actual story. But this one here, so what's this? Spider-Woman. Yeah, this is a multi-part story. It goes on for quite a while. So it's Silk, Spider-Woman, Jessica Drew Spider-Woman, and Spider-Gwen. The three of them have this several issue storyline going on, which involves an evil Cindy Moon, interdimensional espionage. It's pretty cool. Probably my favourite story. Well, no, this was one of my favourite stories in the whole thing. But my favourite part of the entire series actually comes towards the end. And that's with the Venom, the interpretation of Venom that we see on Earth 65 and how it interacts with Gwen. It is very fun. We see a pretty interesting looking version of Doc Ock there with actual octopus tentacles. Yeah, so the Venom stuff, which comes later on, honestly, like by the point that it got to that part of the story, that's when it became like a real page turner for me. I really couldn't help but just keep reading and reading until I finished it very quickly at that point. But Gwen actually, yeah, this is an interesting bit where she gets depowered, and for a while she doesn't have her main spider powers anymore, without taking this special kind of formula that's been created, which she has so many doses of that she can inject herself with to give her powers back temporarily. But at that point, you know, she becomes very conscious of the fact that she can only power up so many times, so she doesn't want to waste them on things that are maybe not so serious. You know, quite a lot happens in what is really a relatively short series. And I'm skimming over a lot of details here, as I'm sure you can imagine. But really, you know, I'm just trying to give an overview of what to expect as you go through here, I suppose. Not telling you everything in complete detail. And obviously showing off a lot of this artwork as well, which I think, as I say, it is important to know what to expect to get an idea of the tone of the book. My particular copy, I'll just point this out, I don't think this affects really anyone else that I'm aware of, and it's not a major issue, but around the midway of the book, there's a minor binding problem on my copy here, where there's just been a little bit of separation away from the ribbon. Now, it's not a problem because, all the sewn binding is still intact and it only happens here. The rest of the book seems fine, but it just looks like the glue came away a little bit there. So the pages just separate a little bit awkwardly, a little bit unnaturally. But as I say, I don't believe that is an issue with anyone else's copy in general. I think it's just specific to mine. Not a big problem for me. I could probably repair it fairly easily if I wanted to, but so far, having read through it all, I don't think that will be necessary, but I don't know, I'll keep an eye on it. But I just wanted to point that out, just on the off chance that there might be other copies out there that maybe have some issues with the spine, with the binding. But because I've not heard anyone else mention it anywhere online, I don't think it's like I say, a big issue generally with this book. So here's where we get this team up between Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and Spider-Gwen. So this is crossing over with what was at the time the ongoing Spider-Man series featuring Miles. It's been written by Brian Michael Bendis. And overall, I've got to say, the artwork and the Spider-Man issues with Miles, I think, is stronger than the style, the Robbie Rodriguez art in the Gwen issues. Actually, it kind of made me wish that more of the Spider-Gwen comics were illustrated in the same way. But, like I say, by this point in the book, I was fully used to this, the Rodriguez style anyway, so. But this is a cool team up, because Miles and Gwen have a pretty cool chemistry going on with each other. They're a little bit flirty with each other. There's a slight element of will they, won't they get together running through here. And if you're not familiar with it, I'll let you kind of see how that plays out for yourself without specifically spoiling it. But it's just a cool dynamic between the two of them. And I had a lot of fun reading that story, to be sure. But then, following on from that, right about here, in fact, during this story, is where the Venom symbiote, which in this world is a kind of, it's a man-made thing created in a lab, kind of reminds me of what Venom is in the Ultimate Spider-Man universe. But it's kind of got this, I don't know, I can't remember what the comic book science is that they use to explain it, but it reacts in a very specific way to Gwen in a way that it doesn't react to anyone else. So if it contacts anybody else, it pretty much kills them. But with her, it works in a more of the classic sort of symbiotic way. And when the Venom costume takes over Gwen, and also pointing out that it's not like a black slime like the symbiote is as well, it's like, as you see on this cover, it's like lots of tiny little, as it's described in the comic, like gooey spiders, which seems kind of gross, but that's pretty much what it is. And it creates a really cool look as well for Gwen and her costume. I think so anyway. Just trying to get to the first bit. So yeah, this is where you start to see it. One thing I will say though, and this isn't a critical point about Rodriguez's artwork, is that there are certain panels sometimes where, and I think this is actually a combination of the art style and the colouring, when there's a lot of dark colours used, it can be quite difficult to sometimes make out exactly what you're seeing, at least until you stare at it for a little while, and then you can sort of see. Like initially I couldn't quite tell that was Gwen stood against a black background, but then I stare at it for a few seconds and I say, oh, there it is. But yeah, so she's cut this like long tongue that's part of the costume and also sort of trails behind her. The hoodie becomes like a mouth. It's really cool, and she becomes like very dark, just like the symbiote does, the Venom symbiote in the 616, it kind of brings out the darker parts of her personality. She becomes more, hateful, angry, violent, and she's trying to control that. But what's really cool, what I liked, is that she sort of embraces it for a while, and it is honestly quite good to see a hero sometimes just embrace the darker side a little bit, and go down that path for a little while. I mean, you pretty much know that she's ultimately gonna reject it and go back to the hero's way, but for a while there, it was cool to see that. That she doesn't just immediately resist it. And the thing is, in the end, she doesn't get rid of it either. So she doesn't force the Venom symbiote to separate. It's not like the classic Peter Parker story where he realizes it's a symbiote and gets rid of it. She keeps it because it restores her powers. While she's got this Venom symbiote with her, she's got all her powers back. She doesn't need to take the injections anymore. And so that is how actually she ends up keeping her powers, because she keeps the suit. So as at the end of this series, she gains more control over Venom, but she's still got the costume. Really interesting story here, though, where she gets kind of displaced in time and space and is seemingly hanging out with the Gwen Stacy of the Silver Age era. And yeah, that's quite interesting. It was very unexpected when I got to that bit. But there is a twist that reveals it's not exactly what it seems to be. But yeah, there's a lot of multiversal travel going on, though, so I've got to point that out. If this whole multiverse thing, which is very much a craze these days, I think, in comics and comic-related media, if it's not your thing, if you think it's a bit of a gimmick, then you might not enjoy this, because there's quite a lot of multiversal travel going on between alternate Earths. But this does have a very satisfying conclusion. There's been a lot of culmination of events that goes on at the end, a lot of build up to this, the conflict with the evil Matt Murdock, and getting to grips with her Venom symbiote, all the issues that she's had, in her personal relationships with her dad, with her friends. Things finally kind of come together in a satisfying way, and by the time I read to the end of it, which I did here, it felt like it had been one overall cohesive story, and it had a satisfying end. It had a good beginning, it had a good end. It doesn't feel like you've got to directly read on and read something else. Obviously, Spider-Gwen has continued to be published. There is a series that I think is ongoing that started after that. I think it's just called Ghost Spider now. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this series. Is it one of the best series I've ever read? No. But was it a lot of fun? Absolutely. And I would recommend it to anybody who is, interested in the Spider-Verse thing and the alternative Spider people. I think she's a great character to come out of all that. There's a good amount of extras in here in the back, by the way. A lot of biographies of the Earth 65 versions of a lot of these characters. And there are also a lot of variant covers as well. I'll just show off in a second. Just flick through some of these. It's a good amount of extras in the back. I think it's a good omnibus. Interesting that it's not called a volume 1, though. I guess because as of the time that they've published this, there isn't enough material yet released to create a volume 2. But it'll be interesting to see what they do about that, perhaps in the next couple of years or so. Assuming there's going to be more Spider-Gwen omnibuses. What they'll end up calling the next one. I guess maybe just Ghost Spider Omnibus. I suppose, maybe that makes sense. Some quite cool images here of different action figures. Just a lot of different variants, a lot of cool ones. Nice J. Scott Campbell one there. Some of the artists in here I know, others I don't. Like Terry Dodson there. Bob McLeod. Really cool one there by Joe Jusko with his ultra-realistic style. Deadpool style one as well. Like these bookend pages as well, by the way, that match the colour of her shoes and her costume. I think that's a nice touch. But yeah, so what, overall, this was a fun read. It only took me, I got through the whole thing in about a week, I think. you know, not bad for what is a pretty thick omnibus. I think as well that this, I mean, I might be speaking too soon, but I have noticed this has started to go out of stock in a few places, so it might be getting to the point where it's in danger of going out of print. As I say, I'm not 100% sure about that. It's an educated guess at the most, but it might be something worth checking out if you are interested in it and picking it up before too long. But you know what, as always, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts as well. If you've read this run, what did you think of it? Did you like it, not like it? Was the art to your taste? I feel like the art is maybe the most divisive point of this series. And yeah, I'm just interested to hear what other people think about it. But anyway, as always, thanks for watching if you've stuck with this video all the way through. Appreciate it as always. And I'll be back again at some point to discuss something else.